All right, so he also made a lot of really good points. I'm going to try to hit as many of these as I can. So he opened with a quote by Father Richard Price from in regards to the Tome of Leo at Chalcedon. So I want to read another quote by Father Price at Chalcedon. He says, quote, "Nothing could be more indicative of the mood of this council than the fact that even Theodoret had to defend the Tome of Leo by appealing to the authority of Cyril. His own attitude was by far more critical. He had strongly attacked Cyril's 12 chapters back in the pamphlet war in early 431 and had been reluctant to accept Nestorius' subsequent condemnation. But he clearly recognized that it would be disastrous to argue that there was something valuable in the Tome of Leo that was lacking in Cyril. Instead, he played along with the conviction of the majority that Cyril provided the yardstick of orthodoxy." He says, again, same council, again, Father Price, quote, "The fathers of Chalcedon were profuse in their professions of loyalty to Cyril, even when judging the tome of Pope Leo. Their criterion of orthodoxy remained agreement with Cyril. This is clear throughout the lengthy discussion of the tome in the fourth session." I'm going to move on to a couple of historical examples that he brought up. He brought up Corinth's appeal to Rome. I would simply ask, why does Clement writing to Corinth prove Petrine supremacy any more than Paul writing to Corinth proves Pauline supremacy? So that would be my first question. I would also say he brought up the Apostle John. There is debate over whether or not the Apostle John was in exile at the time. However, the fact that that Rome was appealed to by Corinth instead of John is actually irrelevant. Rome had appellate authority, and eventually so did many patriarchates. Corinth is well within Rome's jurisdiction. I know you had said it's not, so we're going to have to maybe talk through that, because they actually had legates representing ecumenical councils that were from Corinth. So it's definitely well within their jurisdiction. You brought up a quote from Irenaeus, which, like you said, St. Irenaeus, and in that quote it says that both Peter and Paul make Rome unique, when Vatican I specifically says it's the see of Peter. I will also say with St. Irenaeus is he... there's a quote in Against Heresies where he talks about the lines of succession from the apostolic sees having more authority than the other sees. And so St. Irenaeus understood that there was this early doctrine of apostolic sees having more authority than just like a normal see. And actually you see the same thing in St. Cyprian. And so this is why he actually has quotes that say that St. Stephen had some authority over him. It was because St. Stephen came from an apostolic see and St. Cyprian did not. In regards to Victor's excommunication, Eusebius writes this in his ecclesiastical history, quote, "Among them too Irenaeus, writing in the name of the Christians, whose leader he was in Gaul, though he recommends that the mystery of the Lord's resurrection be observed only on the Lord's day, yet nevertheless Irenaeus exhorts Victor suitably and at length not to excommunicate the whole churches of God for following a tradition of an ancient custom. And he conferred by letter that this mooted question not only with Victor, but also with all the other rulers of the church," end quote. So we see, again, a conciliar model. There actually were synods in regards to the excommunication over this particular issue. There were multiple synods prior. I know when you mentioned the synods, you were talking about the adoptionists. We can talk about that too. Irenaeus additionally asserts regarding a pope previous to Victor, I think it was the pope right before Victor, on the same controversy. He says, quote, "Pope Anticetus conceded to Polycarp in the church the celebration of the Eucharist by way of showing him respect," end quote. So I would simply ask, how can you reconcile a pope conceding to a non-pope, another bishop, another apostolic bishop? How can you justify a pope conceding to him when brought up with the same issue? Arian controversy. I mean, the Arian controversy is an extremely complicated situation. Obviously, St. Athanasius was in hiding, so that is why he had to appeal to Rome. I don't know that appealing to Rome is really a problem for my argument at all, though. I would say that the fact that St. Athanasius was appealing to Rome for support when he was in hiding, when there was hundreds and hundreds, maybe even thousands of Arian bishops in the East, that's not really a problem for an Orthodox point of view. The fact that he was appealing to a see that was maintaining orthodoxy. I already you brought the Council of Sardica. I don't have any issue with the Council of Sardica. I think the Council of Sardica actually refutes the Vatican I view of the papacy. Like I said in my statement, there would first be a sentence by the neighboring bishops. Then if the deposed bishop feels the sentence was unfair, he may appeal to the Bishop of Rome because he's the first see. However, as we see in Canon 3 and 9, he is just a review court. If he determines that a retrial is necessary, the final decision for the case is sent to a neighboring province, and the Bishop of Rome is not even authorized to attend. As far as you brought up Ephesus 449, which is a really good point that you bring up, I would say that there were multiple local synods in both Alexandria and Rome that had declared that Nestorius was a heretic prior to the Pope's decree. I would also say that St. Cyril felt completely comfortable with his 5 tomes against Nestorius being distributed throughout the churches. And so his condemnation of Nestorius was being circled throughout all of Christendom, and he had no issue with that. And then I have some quotations from Ephesus, but we'll see if I can come back to those in my time. Main point is the councils that were held before the Pope's final decree by the letter of St. Celestine. All right, this is a super important point. I really need everybody to pay attention very closely to this. He used a lot of quotations, really good quotations that show this absolute language of the Pope being the successor of Peter, and Peter speaking through the Pope, and the Pope will never fail. I really need to nail this point in the absolute language that's used in these councils. Listen to this quote. This is by Father Richard Price. It says, "Nor does my devotion suppose that any of the most devout bishops are aware that not merely once or twice, even more frequently, on the matter for the instructions from the divine and inviolable head, I informed everyone that all of the most devout bishops should meet together and hold a common inquiry into the precisions of the pious and Orthodox faith." The inviolable head they're talking about is not the Pope. It's the emperor. In this context, it's the emperor. So you have the emperor is being called inviolable, unable to err. We see the same thing with the quotation I read earlier, with the use of Matthew chapter 16 being used for the emperor, saying that, "And with the Almighty who rules with you, O most devout emperor, you decide because you are appointed by God. Rejoice, O city of Zion, summit of the world and the empire. Constantine ornamented you with purple and crowned you with faith, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against your Orthodox empire." The early fathers were not anticipating that the empire would ever fail. They were not anticipating that any of this stuff would fail. They were anticipating that this would maintain in its same structure until the end. So if you're going to hold absolute language to be interpreted literally, you have to believe that somehow the empire of Constantine, the emperor, is still ruling today. That's what you'd have to believe. Ephesus 449 you talked about. Ephesus 449 is a blatant robber synod. I mean, the Patriarch of Constantinople was murdered during this council. And yes, of course, the papal legates fled and stated that they rejected the council. The reason why this is not an ecumenical council is because it was not affirmed by the patriarchs, including the Pope. And then Dioscorus, you mentioned Dioscorus. He was deposed at Chalcedon and replaced with a true patriarch. So Chalcedon did have the approval and the affirmation of all 5 patriarchs, which is the definition of an ecumenical council, as we see in Nicaea too. You brought up the libellus of Hormisdas. We'll see how much time I have here. I'm just going to read. Patriarch John II of Constantinople says, quote, "I accept the fact that the 2 most holy churches, that is to say, that of ancient Rome and of New Rome, should be one. I admit that the see of Peter and that of the imperial city should be one." So he's uniting Constantinople with Rome here. He was the only patriarch to sign off on this, and it was with imperial influence, was the only reason why he signed off on the libellus. And none of the other patriarchs signed off on it. You mentioned bishops. None of the other patriarchs signed off on it. There is some contest in regards to the Greek of the libellus, which I can read from Edward Denny's book in a little minute. It looks like I have 60 seconds left, I think.
Correct.
Okay. Just trying to figure out what to focus on here. Yeah. So Constantinople too, you had mentioned, or rather Constantinople III, and with Honorius, I would just ask, I know some Roman Catholics take the position that Honorius was not actually a heretic. Some say he was. So I would just ask which pope was correct. I know we're going to hash a lot of this stuff out in the cross exam. Trullo. I'm going to finish on this. You mentioned Trullo was not accepted by multiple popes. That's fine. It was accepted by Pope Hadrian in Nicaea II. It was read in its entirety and affirmed by the Council at Nicaea II, and an ecumenical council, a pope affirmed it.
All right. So now we are going to move on to the next part of the debate, which is going to be the cross-examination period. So Alex, you're going to begin 25 minutes of cross-examining Luigi. And, y'all can be pretty flexible here, though, but just traditionally, the format would be Alex, you would ask questions, then you would respond to them. Traditionally, the person responding doesn't ask questions, they just respond. But I allow for some flexibility if y'all want that, if y'all want to do that. Okay, so I got the timer here set for 25 minutes. Alex, if you are ready to begin questioning Luigi, I'm ready to roll.
All right, let's do it. Let's begin. Okay, so Luigi, you said that Nicaea II, when Pope Hadrian accepted the Council of Trullo, was Pope Hadrian the first pope to accept the Council of Trullo?
I don't know that that's relevant because it was read in its entirety and affirmed by the Pope in an ecumenical council. And so
Right.
just the fact that it was in an ecumenical council makes it therefore more authoritative than just a Pope accepting it or not accepting it. So I would say that's not relevant.
And did the Council of Nicaea II accept Trullo as being an ecumenical universal council for all?
I'm not necessarily making that argument. I'm saying the council was read in its entirety and then affirmed. They said we find no error with this council. So it was read in its entirety and then affirmed by Nicaea II.
Right. Are you aware that Pope Constantine, long before Pope Hadrian, actually accepted Trullo, and he said that it only applied to the Church of the East and that it's not universal? Are you aware of that?
Yeah. I mean, again, I don't think that has any relevance to the fact. It doesn't refute the fact that it was affirmed by Nicaea II in an ecumenical council. I don't think that refutes that.
But you're also aware that before Pope Constantine accepted it, two previous popes, John VII and the pope before him, they rejected the Council of Trullo, and all of the churches in the East, they respected that authority of the pope, that he rejected the councils, because they weren't considered authoritative until after Pope Constantine accepted them. You're aware of that, correct?
Yeah. Yes, but again, this does no relevance. There's much dispute over what councils are accepted and what not accepted. But when an ecumenical council affirmed by a pope affirms a council, that means the council is authoritative. This is why you as a Roman Catholic accept Carthage, 397, for example. And so just because there's dispute over whether or not a local council is authoritative doesn't matter if an ecumenical council reads it in its entirety and affirms it.
Is the Pope above councils, or I'm sorry, is the Pope above canons, or are canons above the Pope?
I would reject that dichotomy. I would say that the conciliar consensus of the church in an ecumenical council is above the Pope.
That's not what I asked. I asked, are canons above the Pope?
Ecumenical canons?
Canons at all, yeah.
I mean, it has to be an ecumenical canon affirmed by the five patriarchs.
It can only be an ecumenical canon affirmed by the five patriarchs. Okay. Why do we consider Ephesus to be ecumenical when we had a patriarchate that didn't accept Ephesus?
All the patriarchs accepted Ephesus. All the valid patriarchs eventually did accept Ephesus. That's the point.
Ephesus was ratified as an ecumenical council apart from the Church of Antioch, and everybody accepted that, but Antioch didn't accept it. The same thing is true for the Council of Chalcedon. There was a patriarch there that didn't accept it. So when you say that Nicaea II says that all the patriarchates need to accept a council, does that apply for all time from the very beginning, or is that just a canonical law that isn't definitive? It isn't something that is part of a divine constitution of the church. It's just something that they said to go forward, because we know that it's not true with the early ecumenical councils.
No, again, the valid patriarchs did affirm the council. Again, with Chalcedon, for example, Dioscorus was deposed at Ephesus, and the Egyptian bishops were actually the ones who brought forth a true patriarch that did affirm the council. So you would have to argue. I mean, first, I would say that that's not true about Ephesus and Chalcedon, and then on second, I would say you would have to disagree with the definition of an ecumenical council that Nicaea II gives. You have to say that Nicaea II is wrong about its definition of an ecumenical council.
Okay. You talked a lot about a lot of the language that was used about the Roman emperor. You don't affirm Caesaropapism, do you?
I mean, define it.
Caesaropapism basically means that the emperor, the Roman emperor, is the one who calls all of the shots in Jesus Christ Church.
Oh, I would affirm I love the quote by Theodore the Studite. I mean, when he says that the emperor is there to aid as the final acclamation, and that's really what we see in Constantinople III, when actually Pope Agatho himself says, that was Pope Agatho who says the Holy Spirit was guiding you by his authority with the imperial pen when he's speaking to the emperor. So Pope Hadrian understood, or Pope Agatho understood this, and the bishops of Constantinople II and III understood this. So that's what my view would be on that.
So what happened in the 4th century when the Roman emperor was an Arian, and he
yeah.
deposed all of the Orthodox bishops and put in Arian bishops? Was the Roman emperor infallible then, like as the quotes have said, as the quotes that you've brought up have said about him?
Yeah. I'm not arguing that the emperor is infallible. I'm arguing that they were using absolute language, and it's not to be taken literally. I mean, Pope Felix II was an Arian as well. And so there are examples of falling into error. This does not refute the overarching testimony of these councils that the final acclamation of the Ecumenical Council by the emperor and by the patriarchs and by the Pope is what makes it authoritative, and that is infallible.
Did Pope Felix II teach Arianism in his magisterium?
That's irrelevant. I mean, did the emperor teach Arianism in his magisterium? Like, I mean, this is like the point.
Go ahead.
I feel like you might be attacking a straw man because I'm not arguing that. Like,
okay, then let's move on to let's move on to something else. Then, what does it mean that the Pope is merely the first among equals?
Yeah, so I would say that this would be akin to the Nasi in the Old Testament. That's where we see the continuity, where it was still held in the Sanhedrin, but there was a head of that Sanhedrin. What we see in the Byzantine two-headed eagle is the emperor and the Pope, and we see both of these affirming the Ecumenical Council, and that along with the patriarchs then makes it ecumenical. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay, I'm going to read you a quote from an Orthodox priest and canonist. He's a scholar. His name is Father John H. Erickson. I'm going to read you this quote, and I want you to tell me what you make of it. He says this: "While the Patriarch of Constantinople is acknowledged by all as first among equals, what this priority involves in the actual life of the Orthodox churches is by no means clear." So what do you make of that quote?
The Patriarch of Constantinople being the first?
It says, yeah, the Patriarch.
You're talking about like second millennium when Rome schismed, and is that what the context of this is, or like what?
It would have to be, because it says the Patriarch of Constantinople is acknowledged as the first among equals, which the Orthodox today acknowledge him as that. But it says here that is not clear. This scholar in Canada is saying that it's not clear what that even means.
Sure.
For example, can the Patriarch of Constantinople make other churches autocephalous?
Well, actually, that actually happens in Ephesus 431. Churches are granted autocephalous at that council.
But I said the Patriarch of Constantinople by himself. Just what do you make of that quote?
No, we would never say that. We would say that it always is to be. I mean, we would affirm what Sardica does, that the first see operates as the first among equals, but always in the model of a synod, always with left and right lateral accountabilities.
If the Pope doesn't have universal jurisdiction, how did Pope St. Victor excommunicate Theodotus of Byzantium by his own authority, apart from the Bishop of Byzantium?
Yeah, was this, you're talking about the issue of the Asia Minor with Asia Minor?
This was actually before that. This was something else.
Yeah. So I would say this, right? I mean, I already read to you the Pope right before before Pope Victor. He actually concedes to Polycarp's authority. And so I would say that in those really early days, the apostolic sees they were perceived as having more authority. The sees of, for example, when Stephen has authority over Cyprian early on, in those early quotes that Roman Catholics love to use of St. Cyprian, what he's referencing is the apostolic authority of Stephen. That it also is found with St. Polycarp, which is why Pope Anicetus recognizes that authority. So I do think that you would find, it doesn't shock me that in those early days you would find the apostolic see is operating in that sense. That does that. I think. Well, I'll save that for my cross exam.
And that would also apply to Saint Victor being able to call a synod in Asia Minor by his own authority.
So now are you talking about the Quartodecimans, or are you still talking about the adoptions?
Yeah. And
Okay.
this, yeah, he called the synod in Asia Minor according to Eusebius.
Yeah.
That he called it by his own authority.
Mhm. Yeah. So the Quartodeciman issue. Again, I read the quotation from not Saint Eusebius, in regards to Saint Irenaeus, when he exhorts him, and then he says that he wrote to all of the rulers of the church, including Victor. And so I would say you still find in that scenario a conciliar model.
I want to read to you. I'm going to read to you 2 canons from Sardica, and I want you to tell me what you think. Canon 4 says this: if a bishop is sentenced with deposition in a case by a verdict of those bishops who have sees in neighboring places, and if the deposed bishop announces that his case is to be examined by the city of Rome, then the execution of the sentence is suspended, and that a replacement bishop shall not be ordained to the see of the deposed bishop until after the case has been determined in the judgment of the Bishop of Rome. That's Canon 4. Canon 7 says this: if a bishop is deposed from his office by bishops of his region acting as a court, and if the deposed bishop takes refuge with the Bishop of Rome and seeks recourse by asking the Bishop of Rome for a retrial, and if the Bishop of Rome decides that the case should be retried, then the Bishop of Rome may write to those bishops of a neighboring province to investigate conduct a retrial. The deposed bishop may ask the Bishop of Rome to delegate priests to the retrial. At his discretion, the Bishop of Rome can send priests acting as legates with his authority to serve as judges in cases where the Bishop of Rome decides that the bishops of a neighboring province alone are insufficient. So, what do you make of those 2 canons?
Yeah, so what's happening here is a bishop who is deposed is appealing first to their neighboring bishops. If he doesn't like the decision of those neighboring bishops, he then can appeal to the first see, which is how the first see operates. Now, the Pope then, as the first see, analyzes the situation, and if he determines that a retrial is authorized, is necessary, then he sends that actual retrial, the actual appeal, then goes to another neighboring province, and he then is able to send legates, but he doesn't even attend that. So the final appeal is made in a council, it's made in a synod. Canon 9 says that it's sent to the court for the final declaration.
And that final declaration, that final decision, cannot be overturned by any singular bishop or a synod of bishops or councils, correct?
I don't know if I'm comfortable saying that.
Well, let me read some quotes from you, because I actually read these in the opening statement. This is from Pope Saint Boniface, where he says, we have directed to the Synod of Corinth such writings that all brethren may know there is to be no review of our judgment. In fact, it has never been licit to deliberate again on that which has once been decided by the Apostolic See. And he also says, writing to the Eastern bishops of Thessalonica, it is certain that the Roman Church is, as it were, like the head of its members, for the church is spread throughout the whole world, and if anyone cuts himself off from her, he is exiled from the Christian religion, since he no longer can share in the same fellowship. So in the first quote, he is saying that the decisions of Rome cannot be appealed, cannot be overturned, that's it, that's where the buck stops. And then he says that if you depart from this, that you're no longer part of the Christian religion. What do you make of that?
Yeah.
And one other quick thing, he says that no one has ever boldly raised his hands against the apostolic eminence, from whose judgments it is not permissible to dissent. No one has rebelled against this who did not wish judgment to be passed upon him. And this was accepted by all of the other churches. What do you say about that?
Yeah. So I think it's easy to read quotes like that and kind of get an idea that was the model of the early church. But what I would contrast that with is the Meletian schism, where Rome was on the wrong side, and it wasn't until in fact, they were the only ones that weren't in communion with the church. After Constantinople won in 381, the bishop that they had appointed, Paulinius, was not recognized as the true bishop, the true patriarch of Antioch. Instead, it was St. Flavian, who was recognized as the true bishop of Antioch. And so the council decides, then Alexandria submits to the council's decision. Rome attempts to override this. and I can actually, if you'll let me, I can read their response back to it. This is in the synodical letter of Constantinople I. This is their response to Rome trying to assert this authority. It says, although with one voice of consent and respect, the bishops of the province and of the eastern diocese have met together and canonically ordained this reverend and most religious Flavian as bishop over the most ancient and truly apostolic church in Syria, where the first noble name Christian was given. This rightful ordination was received the sanction of the general council. So again, the bishop of Rome tries to appoint his own bishop in Antioch, who's Paulanius. The council says, no, it's Flavian. And this was their response when Rome tries to assert that authority. It wasn't until several years later that Rome finally submits to the rest of the church. They were out of communion with the true patriarch of Antioch, but Antioch was still in communion with the true church. So this idea that you have to be in communion with Rome to be in communion with the true church is not found in history. It contradicts history.
If the Pope doesn't have universal jurisdiction, how is Pope St. Martin, how is he able to replace nearly the entire patriarchates of both Antioch and Jerusalem by his own authority?
You're talking about after the Lateran Council?
Yeah, Pope St. Martin was able to send delegates into Antioch and Jerusalem, and he replaced pretty much both of those patriarchates. All by himself.
I guess I don't understand why Roman Catholics bring up a Lateran in the first place, because this was attempted to be ecumenical by the Pope. But yeah, I mean, I would just say that's him operating as the first see. I'm not disputing a level of appellate authority here.
So by the first see, then you would agree that he has the authority to do what he did, what Pope St. Martin did then.
I mean, just out of a little bit of ignorance on exactly what that situation was, I'd say yes. But I would say again that Lateran 649 is a really hard one for a papal apologist, because this was tried to be made ecumenical, and it was rejected as ecumenical by the rest of the church. So
so the answer to that was yes. All I'm going to say is that actually is what Vatican I would teach. That's part of what papal primacy is. So can the Pope lose his primacy, and if so, who decides that?
Well, hang on. I would just clarify. I would say that's not all that Vatican I claims. So just because that's still not immediate authority over the consent of the church. And that's what you're trying to prove.
So a pope being able to go into the two different patriarchates at the same time and just completely take everyone out and put people back in, that's not universal. That's not immediate jurisdiction.
Well, it is immediate, but it's not immediate over the consent of the church. There was no consent of the church that was trying to dispute this.
Did Pope St. Martin ask for the consent of the church, or?
I mean, not that I'm aware of. I don't know.
So Pope St. Martin believed that he had the authority to do this without having to consult any of the other patriarchs, like Alexandria or Constantinople.
Does he have the authority to do what?
So Pope St. Martin believed that he had the authority to do this without having to consent with Antioch or Constantinople.
I mean, yeah. Again, like I would say that's him operating as the first see. But that's not all that Vatican I claims. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that is an operation. So that's, I can show you examples of Constantinople being appealed to when they were in a Roman jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. I can show you examples of that. And those were the Patriarch of Constantinople operates without a council in those examples.
Can you show me any canons in the church that say that any other bishop besides the Bishop of Rome can be appealed to, and that decision will be the final authoritative decision?
The Patriarch of Constantinople?
Any bishop besides the Bishop of Rome.
Canons 3 and Canons 9 and 17 of Constantinople 1, Canon 3 of Constantinople 1, Canon 28 of Chalcedon.
So are you aware that Canon 3 of Constantinople 1 was rejected when Constantinople 1 was made ecumenical at the Council of Ephesus, and Canon 28 of Chalcedon was rejected by Pope St. Leo? He just outright rejected it, and the Patriarch of Constantinople bowed to Pope St. Leo's authority, and Canon 28 was never received in the Christian Church after the Council of Chalcedon.
That's not true. In the 5th century compilation of the canons, the Prisca Versio, the canons of Chalcedon were compiled, and Canon 28 was included. And so, actually, the fact that Pope Leo attempted to remove it is actually a major disservice to the papal authority, because the church did accept it. In fact, Eusebius in that very council states that the Pope had already accepted it in reference to Constantinople I, Canon 3. But I also brought up Canons 9 and 17, which bring up the appellate authority of Constantinople. So it wasn't; those were accepted, certainly accepted by everyone.
Yeah, but you are aware that Constantinople I wasn't ever considered ecumenical until it was made ecumenical at the Council of Chalcedon.
Yeah.
So it was considered to be
No.
something that was only regional. Chalcedon is what made Constantinople I ecumenical. For example, even at the Council of Ephesus didn't recognize Constantinople I as having been ecumenical, because when the Council of Ephesus recites the creed, it isn't the creed from Constantinople I, it's still using the creed from Nicaea I. So Constantinople I wasn't an ecumenical council yet. So those canons weren't universally binding, but at ecumenical councils, those canons, when they were brought up, were rejected by the Pope. Canon 3 and Canon 28 of Chalcedon were both rejected. And again, the emperor, I'm sorry, not the emperor, the patriarch of Constantinople accepted.
Alex, keep it in the form of a question, though. If you
Okay. Are you aware that when Canon 28 was reinserted into the East, it wasn't in ecclesial law, but it was actually inserted in the civil Roman law? I think it's Novella 131. Are you aware that it was never accepted by the church? It was accepted by the civil law.
It was accepted by the church. I mean, again, and actually, I would argue is accepted by the Western church as well, because even at Florence, they refer to the canons that make Constantinople the second see right behind Rome. There's only one canon, singular. There's only one canon. It's Constantinople I, Canon 3. The only other canon that could be being talked about at Florence is Canon 28 of Chalcedon. So I would actually argue there's a debate to be had whether it was even accepted in the West.
So actually, that canon was accepted before the Council of Florence at the Council of Constantinople IV in 869, and that was finally when the Pope allowed it and allowed the canon after it had been rejected since the very beginning. You are aware of that, right? That Constantinople IV was the first time that Canon 28 was accepted by the Christian Church, not just the civil law of the Roman Empire.
I reject 869 as Constantinople IV. Constantinople IV is 879.
I didn't ask you if you accepted this council as ecumenical, but I just asked you if you're aware that 869 was the first time that a council that was accepted by Rome was the first time that they affirmed Canon 28 of Chalcedon. You are aware of that?
Well, sure. I mean, that does detriment to the fact that Pope Leo rejected it, but another pope accepts it.
So it only does detriment if the popes are under canon law, but because popes are above canon law, it actually proves Vatican I. Because you would agree then that now would you agree that in the first millennia we have instances of popes that rejected canons, and then later popes that accepted those canons, such as Canon 28 of Chalcedon and the canons of Trullo? You would agree with that, right?
Yes, but
okay. So
I don't
you would
agree
that the Pope is above canon law.
No. I don't agree that the church was accepting Pope Leo's determination that this wasn't a canon, because again, we find it in the Prisca Versio compilation in the 5th century. So I don't accept that assertion. Just because a council accepts it and a pope accepts it, I think that's detrimental to the papal apologists trying to argue. So was Pope Leo right, or was the Pope of 869 right?
So they were both right, because they both at their times had authority. And you know what? This is my cross-examination. Please ask me that when you ask your question.
Okay. Yeah.
But I'm having so much fun. I hope you're having a good time too. So why hasn't the Orthodox Church been able to hold even a single ecumenical council since the schism, while the Catholic Church has continued to have them?
Well, they just don't call it ecumenical; they call it pan-Orthodox. So in 1672, which is affirmed by all the patriarchs, is considered to be authoritative, and they call it a pan-Orthodox council, not ecumenical. So it's still an authoritative, binding council. So I would just say that the magisterium itself is slow, but that's because there's checks and balances, just like there was in the first millennium.
Why was it that in the first millennium they could have a total of 7, but in the last millennium they were only able to have, according to you, just 1?
Well, because the whole purpose of the ecumenical councils was to establish a sealed set of dogma. And so, like, even the very fact that a pope can go in and say that a canon is either invalid or valid of an ecumenical council is actually incredibly dangerous. I mean, at that point, like, I'm always told that a pope can only do that which is tradition has preserved. But you're telling me now that a pope in 869 went in and affirmed a canon of an ecumenical council that was already rejected by a previous pope.
Yeah.
So
this will be the last question that I asked you. Was Canon 28 of Chalcedon, did that have anything to do with matters of dogma, matters of faith or morals?
It specifically uses the word authority.
But did it have anything to do with actually matters of the faith, with like dogmatizing anything or anything having to do with morals?
Again, I mean, it's authority gives you
But
authority
again,
is a broad
the
term.
question is simple. Does that canon have anything to do with what
Yes.
we read in divine revelation, or with what or anything that has to do with morals?
Yes, I would say that's what authority means.
What is it that's in divine revelation that that Canon 28 of Chalcedon addresses? Where is it in divine revelation, in scripture or tradition, that the see of Constantinople is second place to Rome? Where is that in divine revelation?
Where is that in divine revelation? That
Yes, where did God reveal that
That's fine, but
Constantinople? Okay.
Well, Luigi, you can finish answering the question. That will be
I would. As in divine revelation, like, I mean, the canon of an ecumenical council being Constantinople I, we find the same thing in the canon of an ecumenical council of Constantinople I. So